Jakasam.
She didn't ask for kindness. She didn't ask for warmth or welcome or even a proper greeting. Standing in the doorway of a stranger's kitchen, a man she had married 3 hours ago without once looking him in the eyes. Nora Blake looked at the pot of stew on the stove, at the 3 full bowls already set on the table, and quietly asked, "May I have whatever's left? Not a seat, not a share. Whatever's left." Jack Aldridge stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair, set a full bowl directly in front of it, and said 2 words that would change everything between them. "Sit down." If this story moves something in you, if you've ever been made to feel like you were only worth the scraps, subscribe to this channel right now and follow Nora's story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's find out together. The wagon stopped without ceremony. No announcement. No welcome. Just the creak of old wood, the snort of a tired horse, and the sound of wind cutting across open Kansas flatland like it had somewhere more important to be. Nora Blake, she was still getting used to that name, had only owned it for a matter of hours, climbed down from the wagon seat, with the careful, deliberate movement of a woman who had learned not to expect a hand offered. She didn't look at the man beside her. She hadn't looked at him much since the courthouse in Caldwell, where they had stood before a judge with thin hair and tired eyes, and exchanged vows that neither of them had written, neither of them had chosen, and neither of them, she suspected, entirely believed. She had $4 left in her coat pocket, a bag with 2 dresses, 1 pair of worn boots, a small Bible her mother had pressed into her hands before she died, and a tin of buttons she kept for no reason she could explain, except that some things you hold on to, because letting go of everything at once will kill you. She had no family left, no home to return to, no prospects that anyone with sense would have called prospects. What she had was a name on a piece of paper that matched the name of the hard-faced man now unhitching the horse without so much as a glance in her direction. Jack Aldridge. She had met him exactly twice before today. Once at the land office in Caldwell, when she had gone to inquire about work, any work, and had been told by the clerk behind the counter that they didn't have positions for women without references. The second time was 6 days later, when a man named Hank Miller, who worked for Jack and apparently served also as some kind of informal go-between, had appeared at the boarding house where she was 2 days from being turned out and asked her if she would consider a practical arrangement. "He's not looking for romance," Hank had said, turning his hat in his hands with the discomfort of a man delivering a message he hadn't entirely volunteered for. "He's got a boy, got a ranch, got more work than 2 men can manage. He needs someone who can keep a house and handle accounts." That's all he said to say. "And what does he offer?" Nora had asked. "Room, food, your name on the deed as co-holder, so the bank can't come after the place through widow law." "And if I want to leave?" Hank had looked at her steadily. "He said you're free to go anytime you choose. He won't hold you." She had thought about it for exactly 1 night, which was, she supposed, 1 night longer than some women got. She said yes. Now, she stood in front of a ranch house that looked like it had been through something she couldn't have said what exactly, but there was a quality to it, the way the fence post on the left side leaned and hadn't been straightened, the way the window on the upper right had a piece of burlap instead of glass, the way the whole structure seemed to be holding itself together through sheer stubbornness rather than sound construction. It reminded her uncomfortably of herself. Jack Aldridge led the horse toward the barn and said over his shoulder without turning, "Doors open, kitchen's on the left." That was all. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She went inside. The kitchen was plain and functional and cold in the way that rooms get cold when no one has been in them for a while, not the cold of a winter night, but the cold of absence of meals eaten fast and forgotten, of a space used only for necessity and never for comfort. There was a cast-iron stove, a heavy wooden table with 4 chairs, shelves with tin plates and cups, and a few jars of preserved things. A pot sat on the stove stew by the smell, something with beans, and a little salt pork, and it was warm enough that someone had started it recently. Nora set her bag down by the door. She did not sit. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and breathed and told herself what she had been telling herself for the past 3 years. You are still here. That's enough for right now. Just be still here." The sound of boots on the porch, and then Jack came through the door. He moved the way men move when they have been doing physical work their whole lives and stopped noticing it. Efficient contained no extra motion anywhere. He was not a large man in the way that makes people step back. But there was a density to him, a quality of someone who had weathered a great many things and come through without getting soft about it. He didn't look at her when he came in. He went to the stove, lifted the lid on the pot, looked at it briefly, replaced the lid. He opened a cabinet and took down 2 bowls. Then he stopped. He turned and looked at her for the first time since the courthouse. She was still standing exactly where she'd been. Coat still on, bag still by the door. "You didn't sit," he said. It was not a question. It was not precisely an accusation. It was an observation made by a man who noticed details and didn't always know what to do with them. "I didn't know if I was meant to," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, but a kind of recalibration, like a man adjusting the sights on a rifle. He pulled out a chair, set one of the bowls on the table in front of it. Then he set a second bowl across from it and sat down himself. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He didn't fill her bowl part way. He didn't hand her a smaller portion. He served the same amount he served himself, and then set the ladle back and picked up his spoon and began to eat. She looked at the bowl in front of her. Full. Hot. She had eaten half a biscuit at mid-morning, and nothing before that since yesterday's supper at the boarding house, which had been thin soup and half a cup of milk. She picked up her spoon. They ate in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, not comfortable silence, just silence. The silence of 2 strangers who have agreed to something without yet knowing what it means, who are eating stew at the same table and trying to figure out what the rules are going to be. When they were done, she reached for his bowl to bring it to the wash basin. He said, "You don't have to do that tonight." "I don't mind," she said. "I know you don't," he said. "I said you don't have to." She set the bowl back down. He stacked both bowls himself and set them by the basin. Then he said, "There's a room at the top of the stairs, the one on the right. Eli's on the left." "Eli is your son," she said. "He's 8. He was at my neighbor Maggie Pruitt's today. I'll bring him back tomorrow." She nodded. "There's a lamp on the table at the top of the stairs," he said. "Matches in the tin beside it." "Thank you." He nodded once, picked up his coat from the hook by the door, and went back outside. She stood alone in the kitchen. She went upstairs. The room was spare. A bed with a quilt that had been washed many times, a small dresser, a hook on the wall for clothes. There was a window overlooking the yard, and through it she could see a single lamp burning in the barn. She sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced her boots. She did not cry. She had gotten past the part of herself that cried easily. What she felt was more like the particular quietness that comes after a very long road, when you have finally stopped moving and your body doesn't quite know what to do with stillness. She thought, "He gave me a full bowl. It was such a small thing, and it was not a small thing at all." She put out the lamp and lay down in the dark and listened to the wind, and eventually slept. The next morning she was up before the sun. She had always been an early riser, not from virtue but from habit formed in childhood, when being first to the kitchen meant a few minutes of quiet before the rest of the world demanded something from you. She built the fire in the stove from the wood stacked beside it, found oats in the pantry and a partial tin of salt, and had a pot of porridge going by the time the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. Jack came down the stairs at 5:30. He stopped at the bottom when he smelled the fire, and then came into the kitchen and stopped again when he saw the table set and the pot on the stove. He looked at her. "I wasn't sure what time you came in," she said. "I left it on low so it wouldn't burn." He sat down. She set a bowl in front of him. He ate. She sat across from him with her own bowl. "I'd like to know what needs doing," she said after a few minutes. "In the house, and if there are accounts I can look at those." Hank said you could do accounts, Jack said without looking up. I can. I kept books for my uncle's dry goods store for 4 years, and for a land surveying office before that. The books are in the office, left of the front room. He was quiet for a moment. They need work. How much work? He looked up then. He had gray eyes. She noticed the kind that didn't give much away. A fair amount, he said. She nodded. I'll start this morning. He went back to his bowl. Then he said, Eli comes back today. He's quiet. Don't take it personally. I won't, she said. He's not unfriendly. He just... Jack stopped. Started again. He lost his mother 2 years ago. He takes time with people. That's all right, Nora said quietly. I take time with people too. Jack looked at her again. That same recalibration. Then he finished his porridge, put on his coat, and went out to the yard. She cleared the table and went to find the office. She found it. She wished afterward that she could say she had been surprised by what she found. She wasn't not exactly. She had seen enough struggling men's finances to know what neglect looked like in a ledger. But this was something beyond neglect. This was the financial record of a man who had been fighting a war on multiple fronts simultaneously, and losing ground on all of them while still somehow staying on his feet, which was either impressive or heartbreaking depending on how you looked at it. She pulled the ledgers out and laid them on the desk. 3 of them. She opened the oldest one first. Cattle sales recorded irregularly, some with full transaction details, some with nothing but a date and a number that didn't match anything she could see on the receipts stuffed in between the pages. Debts to the feed supplier in Caldwell. A loan from the Caldwell Merchant Bank with a repayment schedule that had been met for the first 2 years and then gone sideways. Notes in different handwriting. Jack's, she thought, in the later entries, blocky and impatient-looking, and someone else's before that, neater, more careful. The previous housekeeper, maybe. Or his wife. She sat very still for a moment when she found an entry in that neater handwriting dated just over 2 years ago, and then no more entries in that hand after that. Just a gap. And then Jack's writing beginning again, heavier on the pen, like a man who had to remind himself to put words down at all. She turned the page and kept working. By the time Hank Miller's wagon came up the road with Eli in the seat beside him, she had been at the desk for 3 hours and had filled 2 pages of her own notes. She heard the wagon and went to the window. The boy who climbed down was small for 8, or maybe he just seemed small. The way children seem small when they're carrying something heavier than they should be. He had Jack's coloring, the same gray quality to his eyes, but something else in his face that was softer. He looked at the house, the way you look at a place you're not sure is still yours. Nora went to the door and opened it before he reached the porch. He stopped. She said, "Hello, Eli. My name is Nora. I made some porridge this morning, but I saved you biscuits if you're hungry." He looked at her for a long moment. "Where's my pa?" "In the barn, I think. You can go find him if you want. I'll have the biscuits on the table when you come back." He studied her with the particular solemnity of a child who has learned to read adults carefully. Then he said, "Are you staying?" "Yes," she said. "I am." He looked at her another moment. Then he walked past her into the house, dropped his bag inside the door, and went back out toward the barn. She watched him go. Hank Miller had come up to the porch while she was watching. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with a face that had seen a lot of weather and a manner that was genuinely kind under the practicality. "He warming up to you all right?" Hank asked. "He asked me if I was staying," Nora said. "That's good. That means he's thinking about it." "He lost his mother," she said. Not a question. "Clara, 2 years February." Hank's voice was careful. "She was a good woman. This place was harder after." "I can see that in the ledgers," Nora said. Hank looked at her with something that might have been surprise, and then something that might have been relief. "You've been at the books already? All morning?" And she looked at him directly. "I need to ask Jack some questions about a man named William Ferris." The ease went out of Hank Miller's face so fast it was almost startling. His jaw tightened. His hand gripped the porch rail. "What did you find?" "Numbers that don't agree with each other," she said. "Cattle transactions where the volumes on the bank receipt don't match what's in the ledger. Small enough that you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking carefully. Large enough over time to matter considerably." Hank was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "How bad is it?" "I don't know yet. I need more information." "Who is Ferris?" "He's with the Caldwell Merchant Bank, handles agricultural lending in this region." Hank's voice had gone flat in the way voices go flat when someone is choosing their words with great care. "He's been Jack's banker for 6 years. Has anyone else had trouble with him?" Hank looked at her. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because Nora said, if this is only Jack's problem, it's a bad situation. But if it's other ranchers too, it's something else entirely." Hank stared at her for a moment. Then he said, "The Henson family lost their place last spring. The Doyles sold out in the fall. There were 3 others I can think of in the past 2 years who went under and couldn't explain exactly why. All of them working with Ferris's bank. All of them," Hank said. Nora turned back toward the door. "I need to go back to the ledgers." "Mrs. Aldridge," Hank said, and something in the way he said it, the name she was still adjusting to, said with a weight she hadn't expected, made her stop. "Jack doesn't know how bad it is, does he?" "I don't think he knows what he's looking at," she said carefully. "That's not a criticism. These numbers were constructed to be confusing. Someone put work into making them hard to read." Hank's mouth pressed together. "Can you fix it?" She stood in the doorway of the house she had lived in for exactly 1 night and looked out at the flat Kansas land under a white winter sky at the barn where Jack Aldridge was probably showing his silent, watchful son that the world was still in some sense standing at the leaning fence post that nobody had gotten around to fixing, at all the evidence of a man trying to hold something together with his hands while someone else quietly took it apart from underneath. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I'm going to find out exactly what we're dealing with." She went inside. She was still at the desk when Jack came in at midday. He stopped in the doorway of the office. Eli was at the kitchen table with a biscuit, and Nora had left the door open so she could hear if the boy needed anything, and she looked up from the ledger when she heard Jack's boots on the floor. He looked at the desk, at the 2 pages of notes in her handwriting, at the 3 ledgers open and cross-referenced with the receipts she'd sorted into 2 piles, one for items that reconciled, one for items that didn't. The pile that didn't reconcile was substantially larger. "You've been at this all morning," he said. "Yes." "Find anything useful?" She set down her pen. She had been thinking about how to say this, and she had decided that the only way to say it was directly because a man who had been lied to through misdirection needed someone who would speak plainly. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, "I need to ask you some questions about William Ferris." The stillness that came over Jack Aldridge was not the stillness of a man who hadn't heard her. It was the stillness of a man who had been half expecting something for a very long time and had just felt it arrive. "What about him?" Jack said. His voice was level. His eyes were not. "Your cattle receipts from the past 3 years don't match the transaction records at the bank. The discrepancies are small individually, between $8 and $14 per transaction mostly. But they're consistent and they're always in the same direction. You received less than was recorded, every single time." Jack was very still. "How many transactions?" he said. 26 that I've found so far. I'm not finished." "That's..." He stopped. "A significant amount of money over 3 years, yes," she said quietly. "And that's only the cattle sales. I haven't gone through the loan interest calculations yet, but the figures I'm seeing don't match the rate in your original loan agreement either." Jack Aldridge sat down in the chair across from her. He sat down the way a man sits when his legs have decided they're done holding him up. "I knew something was wrong," he said. Not to her exactly. More like something he'd been carrying for a long time finally had words. "I couldn't find it. I went through those books 3 times and I couldn't..." "It was designed to be hard to find," she said. "The amounts are irregular. The dates don't cluster. Whoever set this up knew that the first thing a person does when they're looking for fraud is look for a pattern, so they made sure there wasn't a consistent one. But there is a pattern, it's just smaller, in the rounding. He looked at her. The rounding. Every discrepancy rounds in the same direction. Toward the bank, never toward you. That doesn't happen by accident over 26 transactions. He was quiet for a long time. Can you prove it? He said. I can document it, she said. Whether documentation becomes proof depends on who's willing to look at it and whether they can be made to care. But yes, I can build a case that would be very difficult for a competent auditor to dismiss. And you think Ferris is doing this to other ranches? Hank thinks so. And if he's right, this isn't a private matter between you and your banker. It's something that could be taken to a commission. Jack looked at the ledger. Then he looked at her. Why did Hank tell you that he doesn't talk to people he doesn't trust? I asked him, she said simply. You've been here one day. I've been looking at your books for 3 hours. That's enough time to know that someone has been deliberately stealing from you and doing it carefully enough that you couldn't see it without knowing exactly where to look. She met his eyes. And I know where to look. Jack Aldridge sat in the chair across from her and looked at this woman he had married for practical reasons and brought home with exactly no expectations beyond functional coexistence, and something moved behind his gray eyes. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but something like the beginning of a question he hadn't thought to ask before. How long do you need, he said, to finish the ledgers? Another day, maybe 2. To write it up in a form that can be presented formally a week. He nodded. Mr. Aldridge, she said, I want to be clear about something. I'm not telling you this to alarm you. I'm telling you because you need to know the full situation before you can decide what to do about it. And I think I believe that it can be addressed. But it's going to take careful work, and it's going to take someone willing to push back against people who have more institutional authority than you do. Are you saying you'll do that? He said. I'm saying I already started, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, and he did something she hadn't expected. He reached across the desk and picked up one of her note pages and read through it carefully and set it back down. All right, he said. That was all. He left the office. She heard him in the kitchen, heard the low murmur of his voice saying something to Eli, and then the sound of a chair scraping, and both of them sitting down together for the midday meal. She stayed at the desk. She picked up her pen. She went back to the numbers. That evening, after Eli had gone to bed, and the kitchen was quiet, Jack came in from the barn to find Nora still at the office desk with a lamp burning and papers spread across every surface. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. You should eat something, he said. I ate with Eli. That was 4 hours ago. She looked up. I'm close to something. In the third ledger. Give me 20 minutes. He didn't argue. He went to the stove and came back 20 minutes later with a plate and set it at the edge of the desk without moving any of her papers. She looked at the plate. She looked at him. 20 minutes, he said, not quite managing to sound like it wasn't a question. 17, she said. There's something wrong with the September transactions in 1881. The volume numbers change between the first entry and the receipt, and I want to understand why before I stop. He pulled the other chair closer and sat. He didn't look at her papers, she thought. Maybe he didn't want to see it again yet, the evidence of what had been done to him. But he stayed. After a few minutes, she said without looking up, Why didn't you bring in someone to look at the books before? He was quiet for a moment. Pride, maybe. Or I kept thinking I should be able to see it myself. It's my ranch. My business. It was constructed so that you couldn't see it, she said. I know that now. You knew something was wrong, though. Hank said you've been worried about the accounts for over a year. Worrying about something and being able to fix it are different things. She stopped writing. She looked at him. Yes, she said. They are. Something passed between them in that moment. Not warmth still and not confession, but a kind of mutual recognition. Two people who had both been in situations where they knew something was wrong and couldn't find the angle to address it, who had both kept moving anyway because stopping was not a viable option. "Eat," he said, and nodded at the plate. She ate. He stayed. After a while, she found what she was looking for in the September entries, a substitution so minor it was almost elegant. A volume figure, altered by a single digit, that changed the transaction total by just enough to matter, and she wrote it down and sat back in her chair. "Got it," she said, almost to herself. "What?" "The mechanism. How they're doing it. It's in the recording stage, not the transaction stage. Someone at the bank is altering the volume figures after the transaction is completed. Which means it's internal. Which means..." She stopped, reorganized her thoughts. "Which means it's not just Ferris. Someone inside the bank is doing the actual record alteration. Ferris might be directing it, or might not even know the details of how it's done. But there's more than one person involved." Jack was very still. "Can you prove that?" "I can show the alterations exist," she said. "Whether I can prove who made them, that's harder. But if the same pattern exists in other ranchers' records, that's much stronger evidence. The alterations would have to come from the same hand. How do we get the other ranchers' records?" She looked at him. "That," she said, "is a very good question." He met her eyes, and for the first time since she had arrived on this ranch with $4 in her pocket, and a bag that barely had enough in it to justify the word. Nora, Blake, felt something shift in the air between them. Not warmth, not yet, not quite, but something like the beginning of a working partnership between two people who had both, in their own way, been trying to hold things together alone for far too long. "Sleep," he said finally. "The records will still be here tomorrow." She looked at the papers spread across the desk. "An hour," she said. "I want to finish the third ledger." He stood up. "The lamp oil runs out at 10. She almost smiled. "That is remarkably effective motivation." He picked up the empty plate from the edge of the desk, and as he turned to leave, she said, "Mr. Aldridge." He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for the plate, and for staying." He didn't turn around, but she heard something in the way he held himself change just slightly, the way a man's shoulders shift when he hears something he didn't expect and isn't sure how to answer. "There's more oil in the cabinet," he said, "if you need it." He went to the kitchen. She turned back to the ledger. The lamp burned for another 2 hours. He never came back to mention the oil. But when she finally came out to go upstairs, she saw that he had left the lamp on the kitchen table lit for her, low enough not to waste just enough to see by. She stood there for a moment looking at it. Enough to see by. She picked it up carefully and went upstairs. The morning Clyde Marsh rode onto the property, Nora was in the yard. Not inside. Not at the desk where Jack might have expected her, where she had spent the better part of 3 days buried in ledgers and cross-references and the careful patient work of making fraud visible. She was outside, standing at the broken section of fence line at the east edge of the yard, turning a loose post with both hands to see how deep the rot had gone. Hank was watching her from 6 feet away with the expression of a man who has been surprised and is trying to decide how he feels about it. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "How long has it been like this?" "Since October, maybe. We've been meaning to get to it. The cattle can get through this gap. If they get through, they can reach the Miller Creek embankment, and if one goes down into that creek in January, you lose the animal and likely whoever goes in after it." She looked at him. "Do you have a spare post?" Hank stared at her. "Yes, ma'am." "Then let's put it in." That was how Clyde Marsh found them. Hank with a post hole digger, and Nora with her coat sleeves rolled back and her hands wrapped around a fence post holding it level, while Hank packed the earth back in around the base. Marsh rode up on a gray horse and stopped at the edge of the yard and looked at the two of them with the particular expression of a man who had expected something different and was recalculating. He was a compact man in a good coat. Not a rancher's coat, too clean, too fitted, the kind of coat that says, "I visit ranches, but do not work them." He had a way of sitting the horse that communicated ease without warmth, the ease of someone accustomed to being in a position of authority. "Looking for Jack Aldridge," he said. Nora kept both hands on the post. "He's not here right now." "And you are Nora Aldridge," she said. "His wife." Something moved across Marsh's face. Surprise quickly managed. He hadn't known, or hadn't expected her to say it that directly without qualification. "I'm Clyde Marsh," he said. "I represent Harrington Cattle Company, and I have some business with Mr. Aldridge regarding a contract review." "What kind of contract review?" she said. She still hadn't let go of the post. "The kind that Mr. Aldridge and I would discuss privately," Marsh said. "Mr. Aldridge's accounts are managed jointly," Nora said. Her voice was completely even. "Any business relating to contracts would go through me as well. You're welcome to come back when he's here, or you can tell me the nature of the review, and I'll make sure he's informed." Marsh looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Hank. Hank was packing earth with studied neutrality. "I'll come back," Marsh said. "I'll let him know you called," Nora said. Marsh turned his horse and rode back down the road without another word. Nora watched him go. Then she looked down at the post she was still holding. "You can check it," she said to Hank. "I think it's level." Hank checked it. It was level. He didn't say anything for a moment, and then he said very quietly, "Clyde Marsh doesn't represent Harrington Cattle Company, Mrs. Aldridge. He's a broker. He works independently mostly for the bank." She let go of the post and brushed the dirt from her hands. "Mostly for Ferris, you mean?" "That's what I mean." "What would he want with Jack's cattle contract?" "If the bank is planning to move on the loan," Hank said carefully, "Marsh would be the one they'd send first to assess the situation, to see if the property's worth taking." Nora stood very still. "They're planning to foreclose." "I think they might be moving that direction, yes. I didn't want to say it without being sure." She looked down the road where Marsh had gone. "How much time do we have?" "If Ferris moves quickly, a month, maybe 6 weeks." She turned back toward the house. "I need to talk to Jack." "He's at the south pasture," Hank said. "He won't be back until—" "Then I'll go to the south pasture," she said. She went. She found him mending wire at the far edge of the property, working alone the way he often seemed to prefer moving with the efficient, contained energy she had already come to recognize as his natural state. He looked up when he heard her coming, and the fact that she was walking fast and had not stopped to put her coat on properly told him something before she said a word. "Clyde Marsh came to the property," she said. Jack's hands stilled on the wire. "When? 20 minutes ago. He said he was from Harrington Cattle Company. He wasn't. He's a broker. He works for the bank." "I know who Marsh is," Jack said. His voice had gone quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet flatter. Tighter, the voice of a man pulling something in close to protect it. "What did he want?" "He said a contract review. He wanted to speak to you privately." She paused. "I told him accounts were managed jointly and he'd need to come back." Jack looked at her. "You told him that?" "Yes." "He accepted that." "He left. Whether he accepted it is a different question." She met his eyes. "Hank thinks they're moving toward foreclosure. That Marsh is an advance assessment they're looking at whether the property is worth taking." Jack set down the wire tool. He didn't say anything. He looked out at the flat gray land for a moment, with an expression she was starting to learn, the expression of a man absorbing something he doesn't want to be true, and doing it anyway, because the alternative is worse. "How far along are you with the documentation?" he said. "I have 23 discrepancies fully documented with cross-references. I need 3 more days for the rest of the third ledger and the interest calculation audit." "You have 6 weeks," he said. "I know, but Hank said maybe, which means maybe less." She waited a beat. "Jack, I need to ask you something." He looked at her. He had been looking at the horizon, but he turned and looked at her directly. And it was she had noticed something he did rarely, and with intent. Jack Aldridge did not give his full attention, casually. "Are there any other outstanding debts I haven't seen in the ledgers? Anything that wasn't recorded?" He was quiet for just a moment too long. "Jack, there's a note," he said. To my father's old business partner, William Cray. $300 from when Clara was sick. It's not in the ledgers because I didn't want it. I didn't write it down because—" He stopped. "Because you didn't want to see it on paper," she said quietly. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. $300, on top of everything else. Nora did the arithmetic in her head quickly, the way she had been doing it for 3 days, building and rebuilding the structure of the debt in her mind, until she could see all its edges. "Is Cray patient?" she asked. "He's been patient for 2 years. Would he take a payment arrangement? Something formal in writing with a timeline." "I haven't asked." "You need to ask," she said. "Today, if possible." A formal written arrangement with Cray takes that debt off the urgent pile and makes the bank's foreclosure case weaker. If you have a documented plan for all outstanding debts, it's harder for them to argue you're in default. Jack looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "You've already thought about this?" "I've been thinking about it since Hank told me about Marsh." 20 minutes ago. Yes. He stared at her, and then he did something unexpected. He almost laughed. Not a full laugh, not even close, but something moved in his face that was the structural precursor of a brief unlocking around the eyes and mouth before he pulled it back. "All right," he said. "I'll ride to Cray today." "Good." She turned to go, then stopped. "And Jack, when Marsh comes back, I'd like to be there, in the room." "Fine," he said without hesitation, and she thought that was perhaps the first time anyone had agreed to something she asked for that quickly and that easily, and she did not know what to do with that feeling exactly, so she filed it away and walked back toward the house. She had 3 days of work to compress into 1. She did it in 2. By the end of the second day, she had a document 41 pages long that laid out in clear sequenced cross-reference detail every discrepancy she had found across 3 years of Jack Aldridge's financial records. Transaction dates, ledger entries, bank receipts, the gap between what the records said and what the receipts showed, the pattern in the rounding, the volume substitutions in the September entries. All of it organized so that anyone with basic accounting knowledge could follow the argument from beginning to end and reach the same conclusion. She sat back from the desk and looked at what she had built. Then she got up, went to the kitchen and drank a full glass of water standing at the basin. Her hands were stiff. Her back ached. The lamp had burned down twice, and she had refilled it twice without stopping. She heard Jack's boots on the porch, and then the door, and she turned. "Cray agreed," he said. He looked tired. It was a long ride to Cray's place and back, but there was something lighter in the way he carried himself. "He'll take $20 a month for 18 months. I told him I'd have the written arrangement to him by Friday." "Good," she said. "That's good, Jack." He looked at her, at the glass in her hand, at the ink stains on her fingers, at the state of her that told him she hadn't moved from that desk in a long time. "Are you done?" "The documentation is done. The argument is built." "Then it's enough for tonight." "Yes," she said. "I think it is." He moved toward the stove. She watched him pour water into the kettle. Set it to heat, take down 2 cups. 2, without asking, just 2 automatically, and felt something quietly remarkable about that. The simple fact of being assumed into the number of people in a room. "Marsh is coming back tomorrow," Jack said. "He sent a note with one of the Henson boys this afternoon." "I know, I saw it." She set down the glass. "I'll be there." "I know you will," he said. The kettle heated. He poured. They sat at the table in the kitchen with plain tea, and Eli's drawing from this afternoon, a horse with legs that were geometrically optimistic, was still on the table between them, and outside, the wind was doing what the Kansas wind always did, and neither of them said anything for a while, and that was, she thought, exactly right. Some silences are not empty. Some silences are proof. She thought about that as she finished her tea. Then she went upstairs, and for the first time in 3 nights, she slept without dreaming about numbers. Clyde Marsh came at 10 the next morning. He came with a man she didn't recognize younger, with the careful blankness of a lawyer or a bank clerk accustomed to waiting rooms and polite silence. They sat in the front room, and Jack sat across from them, and Nora sat beside Jack, and Marsh looked at her placement and said nothing. But she saw his jaw tighten fractionally. "Mr. Aldridge," Marsh said, "I'll get directly to the matter. The Caldwell Merchant Bank has reviewed your loan account and has determined that the current outstanding balance, combined with the operational assessment of the property, places you in a technical default position under the terms of the original loan agreement." Jack said nothing. She had coached him on this, or not coached exactly, but she had said the night before, "Let him finish. Don't respond to the first thing he says. Let him put everything on the table before we say a word." And Jack had looked at her with the serious considering look he gave things he was actually taking in, and said, "All right." So he let Marsh finish. Marsh laid out the bank's position with the smooth efficiency of someone who had done it before. The outstanding principal, the arrears calculation, the property assessment, the bank's right under the loan terms to initiate foreclosure proceedings in the event of sustained default. He used the word default 7 times. Nora counted. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then Jack said, "Nora." Just her name. Calmly, like handing something across a table. She reached to the side and picked up the document from where she had set it on the chair before Marsh arrived and set it on the table between them. "This is a full audit of the Aldridge account transactions for the period January 1880 through December 1882, she said. It documents 41 instances of recording discrepancies between the ledger entries maintained by the Caldwell Merchant Bank and the original transaction receipts held by the Aldridge Ranch." Marsh's face did not change, but the young man beside him looked down at the document with an expression that was the beginning of alarm. "These discrepancies," Nora continued, "consistently favor the bank over the account holder by amounts ranging from $8 to $40 per transaction. The cumulative total over the documented period is $912. Marsh said, "I'm not sure what you think you're—" "The discrepancies also follow a specific technical pattern," she said, without raising her voice, "that indicates alteration of volume figures at the recording stage after transaction completion. This pattern is consistent across all 41 instances." She looked at him directly. "It is not consistent with recording error. It is consistent with intentional fraud." The word landed in the room like something thrown. Marsh said, "That is an extraordinary claim." "It is a documented claim," she said. "Every figure in that document corresponds to a source record with a page and entry citation. It can be verified independently by any qualified auditor." She paused. "We intend to request such an audit from the Kansas Banking Commission." Marsh looked at her. She had his full attention. Now the kind of attention that has stopped performing ease and is working in earnest. He looked at her, and she could see him recalculating the way she had seen men recalculate before. Not changing his position, not yet, but reassessing what she was and what she was capable of, and whether he had badly misjudged both. "Mrs. Aldridge," he said, and the conciliation in his voice was so precisely calculated, it was almost impressive. "I understand you're concerned about the financial situation here, but these kinds of allegations are supported by 41 pages of documented evidence," she said, "and by a formal statement of intent to refer the matter to the Banking Commission, which my husband has already signed." This was true. Jack had signed the referral letter that morning before Marsh arrived. Additionally, we have identified patterns consistent with the Aldridge discrepancies in the circumstances of at least 4 other ranch foreclosures in this county over the past 2 years. If those patterns are confirmed in those records as well, this becomes a multi-account fraud case. Not a dispute. A case. Silence. Marsh looked at Jack. Jack looked back at him with exactly nothing in his face. The particular emptiness of a man who has decided he's done being the one who blinks. "I'll need to consult with the bank," Marsh said. "Of course," Nora said. "In the meantime, the bank's foreclosure notice is premature since the account discrepancies, if confirmed, would materially alter the outstanding balance calculation. We'd request that all foreclosure proceedings be suspended pending the audit outcome. I believe that's standard under commission review protocol. It wasn't quite standard. She had found one precedent for it in a case record Maggie Pruitt had helped her locate at the county records office. But it was close enough that Marsh could not immediately contradict her. He didn't contradict her. He stood up. The young man beside him gathered the papers Marsh had brought, though none of them had been signed, and stood as well. "I'll be in touch," Marsh said. "We'll look forward to hearing from the bank," Nora said. She and Jack stayed seated while Marsh and the young man walked out. She heard the door close. She heard the horses leave. Then she sat in the quiet of the front room, with her hands folded in her lap, and her heart beating at approximately twice its normal rate, which she thought she had managed to keep entirely invisible. Jack said, $912. Yes. He stole $912 from us. At minimum, that's what I can document with the records we have. Jack stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she watched the line of his shoulders and the set of his head and the particular quality of stillness that meant he was not calm, but was choosing carefully to be contained. "I want to put my fist through something," he said, conversationally, like he was commenting on the weather. "I know," she said. "I'm not going to." "I know that too." He turned around. He looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he had started doing more often over the past few days, with a directness that she had stopped finding startling, and started finding something else that she didn't have a word for yet. "How did you know about the commission review protocol?" he said. "Maggie Pruitt," she said. "She found a case record from 1878. It's not an exact precedent, but it's close enough that Marsh couldn't be sure I was wrong." "But you weren't sure you were right." "No, but he didn't know that." Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "You walked in there, and you took everything he had, and you didn't flinch once." "I flinched," she said. "I just did it on the inside." Something moved in his face. That same almost unlocking she'd seen at the fence line, something that wanted to open and was not quite there yet. "Maggie wants to meet with you," he said. "She says she has something to tell you, about the other ranches." Nora straightened. "When?" "She said today if you can go." "I can go." She went to get her coat. In the hallway she nearly ran into Eli, who had apparently been standing very still near the door to the front room for an unspecified period of time. He looked up at her with his serious gray eyes. "Is the man going to take our house?" he said. She crouched down so she was at his level. "No," she said. "He's not." "How do you know?" "Because I'm not going to let him," she said. Simply directly the way she had learned he preferred Eli Aldridge, did not want to be reassured, he wanted to be informed. He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. Then he went to the kitchen. She stood up. Jack was behind her. She turned and found him closer than she expected, close enough that she could see the careful way he was looking at her, the measured quality of it. "He hasn't said okay to anything since his mother died," Jack said. His voice was very quiet. "Not like that." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She put on her coat, and then she went to find Maggie Pruitt. Maggie Pruitt was exactly what Nora would have built if she'd been asked to design a woman who had survived Kansas for 60 years, compact, deliberate, with the kind of face that had stopped apologizing for its opinions decades ago and never looked back. She met Nora at the door of her house and looked at her with the frank assessing gaze of a woman who knew what she was looking at and was deciding whether it met her standards. Apparently it did, because she said, "Come in, sit down. I made coffee," in a tone that was less hospitality and more general instruction, and led her through a front room full of books and papers, and the productive disorder of someone who does serious work in their home. "Jack told me you're handling the accounts," Maggie said, pouring coffee without asking whether Nora wanted any. "I am. He told me what you found." Maggie set the cup in front of her and sat across from her. "I want to show you something." She put a folder on the table between them. Inside were handwritten notes, dense, careful, the notes of someone who had been paying attention for a long time. "I've been keeping track," Maggie said, "of the foreclosures, of the ranches that have gone under in this county in the past 3 years. I didn't know what I was looking at exactly. I just knew something was wrong." Nora opened the folder. 6 ranches. Names, dates, outstanding debt figures at the time of foreclosure, and beside each one in Maggie's careful handwriting notations about the bank, the loan terms, the banker they'd worked with, all of them Ferris. "Were any of them keeping their own receipt records?" Nora asked. "The Hensons were. Martha Henson. She's meticulous, always has been. She's at her daughter's place in Pratt now. I have her address." "I need to see her records," Nora said. "I thought you might." Maggie reached into the folder and produced a sealed envelope. "I wrote to her last week. She sent this." She slid the envelope across. Nora opened it. Inside were 4 pages of Martha Henson's careful notations, partial records, not a full audit, but enough. Enough to see the pattern. The same rounding direction. The same volume substitution approach. The same hand, she thought. The same person inside the bank, making the same alterations across multiple accounts. "This is evidence," Nora said, "of what I've been trying to tell people for a year," Maggie said with the particular flatness of a woman who has been right about something for a long time before anyone would listen. "Who have you told?" "The county commissioner. He was very sympathetic and did nothing. A lawyer in Caldwell who told me I'd need a lot more proof before anyone would take it seriously. A reporter from the Caldwell Chronicle who was interested for about 2 weeks and then moved on to something else." Nora looked at the papers in her hands. At 6 ranches. At the Henson records. At the pattern that was now, she thought, impossible to argue away. "If I can get this to the Kansas Banking Commission directly," she said, "with a formal referral, backed by documented evidence from multiple accounts, they have to open an inquiry. They don't have a choice." "Can you do that?" "I need a qualified affidavit, someone with professional standing in accounts or law, to certify the audit methodology." She looked up. "Is there anyone in this county who would do that?" Maggie looked at her steadily. "There's a man named Arthur Vane. He was the county assessor for 12 years. He retired 2 years ago. He has professional standing, and he's not beholden to the bank." "Would he be willing?" "He has a son who lost his ranch 18 months ago," Maggie said, "to Ferris. To foreclosure he never understood." Nora set the papers down. She looked at Maggie Pruitt across the table. "Tell me everything you know about William Ferris," she said. Maggie refilled her coffee, sat back, and told her. It took an hour. By the end of it, Nora had 3 more pages of notes, a name she hadn't heard before. A state banking official in Topeka named Holland, who had, according to Maggie, been quietly asking questions about Caldwell, lending practices for months, and the absolute certainty that what she was dealing with was not one banker's corruption. It was a system. Ferris had built a system. Marsh was part of it. The alterations inside the bank that was someone else, someone with access, someone being paid or coerced or both. And the foreclosures were the product land taken from families who'd built it, cleared through the bank's legal apparatus available for resale at below market value to buyers that Nora was increasingly certain were connected to Ferris directly. Land theft. Operating in plain sight behind paper, behind legitimate-looking numbers, behind the particular kind of authority that makes people doubt their own arithmetic. She stood up. She put her notes in her coat pocket. "Mrs. Pruitt," she said, "I'm going to need a few things from you. The Henson records, Vane's contact information, and whatever documentation you have on the 6 ranches." "You can take it all today," Maggie said. "Thank you." Maggie stood and walked her to the door. At the threshold, she stopped and looked at Nora with an expression that was not quite soft, but was the close neighbor of something that might have been once before Kansas had its way with her. "You've been here less than a week," Maggie said. "Yes. And you've already got further than anyone else has in a year." "I had better access to the records," Nora said. "No," Maggie said. "You had the sense to look and the nerve to say what you found." She paused. Jack's a good man. He's been drowning. I know, Nora said quietly. Don't let him drown. I'm not planning to. Maggie looked at her a moment longer. Then she nodded once the way people nod when something has been decided and went inside. Nora walked back toward the Aldridge Ranch with a folder of documents, 3 pages of notes, and a problem that had just grown significantly larger, but had also, for the first time, grown significantly clearer. She was almost to the road when she heard hooves behind her. She turned. It was Jack. On horseback, coming from the direction of town, moving at a pace that told her he'd seen her from the road. He pulled up beside her and looked down at the folder in her hands. Maggie's records, he said. Maggie's records, the Henson records, and a name in Topeka. She looked up at him. Jack, this is bigger than your ranch. He looked at her. Ferris has been running this across the whole region. 6 ranches that I can now document, probably more. He has someone inside the bank making the alterations, and he's been doing it for at least 3 years. She paused. There's a banking official in Topeka named Holland who's been asking questions. If we can get our documentation to Holland before Ferris moves on the foreclosure, we can trigger a state-level inquiry. He was very still on the horse. If we go to Topeka, we don't have to go to Topeka. We need to get documents to Topeka. I can write the referral letter. Vane Arthur. Vane, the old county assessor. He'll certify the audit if I can get to him in the next 2 days. His son lost his ranch to Ferris. Jack looked at her. The wind was doing something to her hair that she hadn't noticed, and he apparently didn't think it was useful to mention. He was thinking about something. She could see the shape of it moving behind his eyes. Ferris will know we're moving against him, he said. When the inquiry opens, he'll know it was us. Yes. He's not a man who takes that without answering. I know. Nora. He said her name the way he had started saying it over the past few days, not as instruction, not as summons, but as something between a question and a recognition. Are you sure about this? She thought about Martha Henson's 4 pages of careful notes. About 6 ranches and 6 families and 6 different versions of the same bewildering loss. About a banker in a clean coat who had sat in that front room that morning and called Jack Aldridge a defaulter with the easy confidence of a man who had done it before and expected to do it again. Yes, she said. I'm sure. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned down and held out his hand. She looked at the hand, at the folder she was carrying. I'm not going to drop the folder, she said. I know, he said. Take the hand anyway. She looked up at him. Something in his face had changed. She couldn't have said precisely how. But it was there, a new quality of openness around the eyes and mouth. Like a door that had been kept closed for a long time had been moved a few inches off the latch. Not open, not yet, but off the latch. She took his hand. He pulled her up and she settled on the horse behind him with the folder still under her arm, and he turned the horse toward home. She could feel the steady, contained warmth of him in the cold air. She didn't say anything about it. Neither did he. They rode back in silence, and the silence she thought was different from the silences before. It had changed its quality entirely. It was the silence of 2 people who were no longer strangers, who had looked at a hard thing together and decided to fight it, who were not yet sure what they were to each other beyond that, but were perhaps beginning to find out. When they reached the yard, Eli was on the porch with his arms crossed and his serious face on. You were gone a long time, he said. We were, Nora agreed. I made supper, he said. It's not very good. She looked at the boy with his gray eyes and his crossed arms, and his complete inability to hide the fact that he had been worried about both of them coming home. It doesn't have to be very good, she said. It just has to be supper. Eli considered this with appropriate solemnity. Then he turned and went inside, and she and Jack looked at each other over the back of the horse, and that door that had been moved off its latch shifted open another inch. She went inside to see what Eli had made. It was as advertised, not very good. It was also the best meal she'd eaten in a long time, and not because of the food. Arthur Vane opened his door before Nora knocked. He was a tall man, thinner than he'd probably been in his working years, with the kind of face that had spent a long time looking at numbers and had arrived at a permanent expression of careful skepticism. He looked at her standing on his porch with her folder and her ink-stained hands, and he said, "You're the Aldridge woman. Maggie sent word you'd be coming." He stepped back. "Come in." She came in. He led her to a table already cleared, as if he'd been expecting to work, and sat across from her and held out his hand for the documents without preamble. She gave them to him. He read in silence for 11 minutes. She counted because silence of that kind demands something to do with your hands, and she'd left her pen in her coat pocket and didn't want to reach for it and seem anxious, which she was. So instead, she counted the seconds and made them into minutes and watched Arthur Vane read. He set the last page down. He looked at her. "You built this in how many days?" he said. 4, she said. The Henson addendum came in on day 3. "The methodology is sound," he said. "The rounding analysis that's not obvious. Most people wouldn't find that." "I was looking for it," she said. "I knew the amounts were too irregular for simple recording error. Error clusters differently." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was recalibrating the same way Marsh's had, but in the opposite direction, not threat assessment, but something more like recognition. "My son's name was Daniel," he said. "He lost his ranch in March of last year. He had the loan with Ferris's bank for 4 years. He went under in 8 months after the rate adjustment." He paused. "He couldn't understand it. He went over the numbers with me twice. We couldn't find what was wrong." "May I ask, did he keep his original receipts?" "Some of them. I have them." Nora went still. "Mr. Vane, if those receipts show the same pattern, I know what it means," he said quietly. "I've known something was wrong for a year. I just couldn't prove it." He looked at the document in his hands. "You can prove it." "With your certification, yes. The referral to the Banking Commission needs professional standing behind it. Without that, it's a rancher's wife making allegations. With it, it's a documented audit with verified methodology." "Holland," Vane said. She looked at him. "You know him." "I know of him. He's been making quiet inquiries for 6 months. He's careful he won't move without solid documentation. But if you get this to him with my certification and the Henson records and Daniel's receipts..." He stopped, looked at the table, then looked back up. "He'll open the inquiry." "Will you certify it?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. He picked up the document again and looked at the first page, and she watched something move across his face. Grief, she thought, and anger, and the particular resolution of a man who has been waiting for a door to open and is now deciding whether to walk through it. "Yes," he said. "I'll certify it. Give me today to go through Daniel's receipts and add the addendum. Can you come back tomorrow morning?" "I'll be here at 7, she said. 6, he said. "I want it done before anyone knows we're doing it." She stood up. He walked her to the door, and at the threshold he said, "Mrs. Aldridge, Ferris has friends in this county. When this moves, it will move fast and it won't be clean. You understand that?" "I understand," she said. "Does your husband?" "Yes," she said. "He does." Vane nodded. "Then go home. Get some sleep. You look like you haven't had enough of it." She almost said something about the lamp oil, and then didn't, because it would have required explanation, and she was already tired. She went home. Jack was in the kitchen when she came in, standing at the stove with his back to the door, and Eli was at the table with a piece of paper and a stub of pencil drawing something with the focused intensity of a child who has decided this is the most important thing happening anywhere. "Vane will certify it," she said. Jack turned. He read her face before she said anything else. "And he has his son's receipts. Same pattern. It adds a 7th ranch to the documentation." Eli looked up from his drawing. He had learned over the past few days to track the temperature of adult conversations by sound, even when he wasn't following the content, and something in the tone of this one made him put his pencil down. "Is it bad?" Eli asked. "It's actually good," Nora said. She sat down at the table next to him. It means we have more proof. More proof is better. More proof of what? That someone has been lying about the money, she said. And when you can prove someone's been lying, you can make them stop. Eli considered this with his usual seriousness. How do you make them stop? You tell the right people with enough evidence that they have to believe you. He thought about it. What if the right people don't listen? Jack made a sound from the direction of the stove. Not a word exactly, but a sound that meant, "That's the right question," said by someone who had been wondering the same thing for months. Then you find people above them, Nora said. You keep going up until you find someone who will. Eli picked up his pencil. That sounds tiring. It is, she said. But you do it anyway. He went back to his drawing. She looked at what he was drawing, a house, she thought, with figures outside it, one tall and one shorter, and one that was clearly a woman because he had given it long hair, indicated by emphatic pencil lines. 3 figures outside a house. She looked at that drawing for a long moment before she looked away. Jack set a plate in front of her. She hadn't asked. She hadn't said she was hungry. He'd just set it down and gone back to whatever he was doing at the stove, and she thought about what Maggie Pruitt had said. He's been drowning, and thought that drowning people don't usually set plates down for other people without being asked, and wondered when exactly that had changed, and suspected it had started with a bowl of stew on the first night, and had been building ever since, in ways neither of them was talking about yet. She ate. She went over Vane's certification requirements in her head, while she ate, planning the addendum, thinking about the language of the referral letter to Holland. Then she heard hooves outside, and Jack went still. He was at the window before she'd registered the sound properly. He looked out. His expression closed. Marsh, he said, and 2 men I don't know. Nora stood up. Eli, go upstairs. Eli looked at his drawing, looked at her, made the calculation that children make when adults use a certain tone, and went upstairs without argument. She moved to stand beside Jack. Through the window she could see Marsh on his gray horse, and 2 other men, one in a town coat, one in the kind of plain functional clothing that suggested hired help of an unspecified nature. He's not waiting for an invitation, Jack said. No, she said. Let him knock. Marsh knocked. Jack opened the door. He did not step back to invite them in. Mr. Aldridge, Marsh said. His manner had changed since the morning. There was less smooth ease in it, more edge underneath. I've come with a response from the bank. Come in, Nora said from behind Jack. They came in. The man in the town coat introduced himself as Gerald Peel, associate counsel for the bank. The third man did not introduce himself and stood near the door with his arms at his sides and said nothing, and his particular quality of stillness was not the stillness of someone who was relaxed. They sat in the front room. Nora had the referral letter draft on the table beside her chair face down. She had put it there deliberately. Peel spoke first. He had a precise, efficient voice and the affect of a man who had decided that what he was doing was procedural and therefore required no emotional engagement. The bank has reviewed the concerns raised regarding the Aldridge account and has determined that the discrepancies cited in your document are the result of recording inconsistencies attributable to a staffing transition in 1880 and are not indicative of any intentional irregularity. Nora said, a staffing transition. Yes, ma'am. The bank changed its recording clerk in October 1880, and there was a period of adjustment in recording practices that accounts for the figures you identified. The figures I identified span 31 months, she said. The discrepancies are consistent across all 31 months, including a period 16 months after the staffing transition you're describing. The rounding pattern I documented does not change at any point, including before, during, or after October 1880. Peel looked at his papers. The bank's position. Additionally, she said, the staffing transition explanation, if accurate, would produce random variation in the discrepancies, some favoring the account holder, some favoring the bank, since adjustment errors don't have a directional preference. Every single discrepancy in my documented 41 instances favors the bank. Every one. That is not consistent with error. It is consistent with design. Silence. Marsh was looking at her with an expression that had abandoned all pretense of ease. "Mrs. Aldridge," he said, "I want to be direct with you. The bank is prepared to offer a settlement, a reduction in the outstanding loan principal of $200 in recognition of the recording concerns in exchange for a signed agreement to withdraw the audit documentation and forego any commission referral." The room was very quiet. $200 against $912, and in exchange for silence. She looked at Marsh steadily. "No," she said. "I'd encourage you to think carefully." "The referral to the Kansas Banking Commission was submitted this morning," she said. This was not quite true. The referral was drafted. Vane's certification wouldn't be complete until tomorrow. But Marsh didn't know that, and the difference between submitted and being submitted was a matter of hours, and she was not going to let him know there was a window. Marsh's jaw tightened. "You submitted the referral. The documentation is already in the Commission's hands," she said. Which was also not quite true, but was directionally accurate enough that she held his gaze without difficulty. A settlement offer at this stage would need to go through the Commission process regardless. You're welcome to make the offer formally through that channel. Peel said very quietly to Marsh, "If the referral's already in." "I heard her," Marsh said. The third man by the door shifted his weight. Just slightly, just enough. Jack stood up. It was not a dramatic movement. He simply stood, and the room changed. Jack Aldridge standing in a room was different from Jack Aldridge sitting in a room in a way that was difficult to quantify and impossible to miss. "I think we're done here," Jack said. His voice was very calm. Marsh looked at him, at Nora, back at him. "You're making a mistake," Marsh said. "The door's behind you," Jack said. They left. The third man last, and he looked at Jack on his way out with a look that was meant to communicate something, and Jack looked back with nothing in his face at all, which was more effective. The door closed. Nora let out a breath she had apparently been holding for 3 minutes. "The referral isn't submitted yet," Jack said. He wasn't asking. "It will be tomorrow morning," she said. "You lied to him." "I accelerated the truth by approximately 14 hours. Jack looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "We need to get that referral to Vane tonight, not tomorrow morning. Tonight." She looked up. "Why?" "Because Marsh is going to ride to Ferris, and Ferris is going to figure out the same thing you just told me, that the referral isn't actually in yet. And if he moves before it is..." She was already standing up, already reaching for her coat. "The documents are in the office," she said. "Give me 10 minutes." It took her 8. She pulled the referral letter, the full audit documentation, the Henson addendum, and the draft certification language she'd prepared for Vane, and she put them in the leather satchel that had been sitting in the office corner and she had gathered Jack's from some earlier version of his life when things were different. Jack had the horses ready by the time she came out. They rode to Vane's in the dark with a lantern, and Vane opened the door before they knocked a habit of his she was noticing and looked at their faces and said, "How long do we have?" "Tonight," Jack said. "We need it tonight." Vane stepped back. "Come in." He worked for 2 hours. Nora sat across from him and answered questions and made 2 corrections to the referral letter language and watched Arthur Vane with his careful hands and his son's name behind his eyes work with the precise focused intensity of a man settling a debt. At 10 minutes past midnight, he signed his name to the certification document and set down the pen. "Done," he said. He looked old, Nora thought. Old and tired and relieved in a way that comes from doing something you've been needing to do for a very long time. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Get it to the post in Caldwell before 7. The northbound courier goes at 7 and he's reliable. If it goes on that courier, it's in Topeka by Thursday." "We'll be there at 6, Jack said. Vane nodded. He looked at Nora. "Add Daniel's receipts to the bundle. I've annotated them." He slid another folder across the table. 8 instances, same pattern, same rounding direction. 8. That was 49 documented instances across 2 accounts, with 6 other ranches in Maggie's files as circumstantial context. 49 instances, 2 certified accounts, 7 ranches, and Holland in Topeka, who had been waiting for exactly this. She added the folder to the satchel. They rode back in the dark and the wind had dropped, and the sky was enormous and full of stars. The way the Kansas sky gets in January, when there's no cloud and no warmth and no mercy. But also, nothing between you and the entirety of everything. And she thought about Martha Henson in Pratt, and Daniel Vane, somewhere, managing the fact of having lost what he built, and the 5 other ranches she didn't know the names of yet, and she felt something she had not been expecting, which was not grief exactly, and not anger exactly, but something that lived between them, something that made her grip the satchel a little tighter against her side. They got back at 2 in the morning. Eli was asleep. The house was dark and cold, and Jack built the fire back up in the kitchen without turning the lamp on, working by memory in the dark, the way a man does when he has lived in a place long enough to know it in his hands. She sat at the kitchen table and watched the fire catch. "You should sleep," he said. "We leave at 5. "I know." He sat down across from her. He put his hands on the table, big, work-rough hands that she had been noticing for days without quite deciding to notice them. And he looked at her in the firelight with an expression that was more open than she had seen on him before, the expression of a man who was tired enough to have let some of his guard down and hadn't fully decided to put it back up yet. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right. When you said yes to this arrangement, to coming here, what did you think it was going to be?" She was quiet for a moment, because it was a real question and it deserved a real answer. "I thought it was going to be work," she said. "Keeping a house, keeping books, being useful enough to justify the room. That's all." "That was more than I had," she said simply. He looked at her. "Where were you before?" "Before the boarding house. Before Caldwell." "Selena," she said. "Before that, my uncle's house in Missouri. My mother died when I was 19. My uncle let me work the store accounts in exchange for room. When he died, his son took over the business and didn't need me." She paused. "I've been making myself necessary in other people's places for a long time." "You're not in someone else's place now," he said. The words landed quietly. She looked at him. "Your name's on the deed," he said. "I told you that when Hank made the offer." "I know. I want to make sure you know what that means. Not as an accounting matter." He stopped, started again, the way he sometimes did, the way a man does when he's saying something he didn't plan to say, and is finding the words as he goes. "It means this place is yours as much as mine. What you've done here this week, that's not a hired woman's work. That's a partner's work." She looked at him for a long time. "Jack," she said, "I don't know how to do this part." "Which part?" "The part where—" She stopped. "I know how to work. I know how to make myself useful. I don't know how to—" She looked at the fire, back at him. "I've been careful not to want things that weren't mine to want." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "This is yours." 3 words. Said simply, the way he said everything, without ornament or softness, but with a weight behind them that she felt in the center of her chest, in the place where she had been keeping very careful control of herself since the first night. She looked at the fire for a long time. Then she said, "I know." He nodded, like something had been agreed to, in the way that things between people who don't say everything get agreed to, not spoken fully, but understood. He stood up. 5 o'clock, he said. "I'll be ready," she said. He went upstairs. She sat by the fire for a few more minutes and looked at the satchel on the table and thought about Arthur Vane's hands signing his name, and Martha Henson's careful notations, and 6 families, and 49 instances, and Holland in Topeka, who didn't know yet what was coming. Then she banked the fire and went upstairs and lay down in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought tomorrow. And then after tomorrow, whatever comes next. And you will handle it. You always have. She slept. At 4:53, she was in the kitchen with her coat on and the satchel over her shoulder and the kettle on the stove. Jack came down at 4:55. He looked at the kettle and at her and said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, and also not nothing. They drank their tea standing up and rode out before 5. They reached the post office in Caldwell at 6:40. The postmaster, a thin man named Greer, who clearly felt that 6:40 in the morning was an unreasonable time to be doing anything, accepted the bundle with the commission's address and the certified documentation and the formal referral letter with Vane's attached certification, and stamped it and set it in the northbound courier pile without ceremony. That was it. That simply. A stamp. A pile. A bundle of papers that contained 7 families' evidence and 49 documented frauds and 1 old man's grief and Nora's 4 days of work. She stood looking at the courier pile for a moment after Greer went back behind his counter. Jack was beside her. "It's done," he said. "It's started," she said. "Done is different." "Fair enough." He turned toward the door. Then he stopped. "I want to stop at the Harrington Cattle Company office while we're in town." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because Marsh said he represented them, and he doesn't," Jack said. "And because if Ferris is manipulating cattle sales across multiple ranches, Harrington is losing money too. They might not know it." He paused. "And they're a lot bigger than we are." She stared at him. "You want to bring in Harrington Cattle Company. I want to inform them of a situation that affects their contracts," he said in a tone that was the closest Jack Aldridge came to innocence. "What they do with that information is their business." She looked at him. "That's actually very good." "You're not the only one who thinks," he said mildly. She almost laughed. She felt it rise in her chest and caught it at the last moment, not because it was wrong, but because it was unfamiliar. The feeling of being surprised into lightness by another person and unfamiliar feelings needed a moment. "The Harrington office is on Front Street," she said. "I know where it is." "I know you do," he said. They went. The Harrington Cattle Company regional manager was a heavy-set man named Cord Briggs, who had the florid, well-fed look of a man who was normally unconcerned about his mornings and was now sitting across from Jack Aldridge, and a woman with a leather satchel and 49 documented frauds becoming very concerned very quickly. Nora laid it out in 20 minutes. Not everything. Not the commission referral, not the full audit, but enough. The transaction manipulation, the cattle volume substitutions, the pattern that would affect every rancher selling through Harrington's contracts and recording through Ferris's bank. Briggs said, "How many ranches?" 7 that we can document, Nora said. "Potentially more." And Harrington contracts involved in at least 4 of the 7 documented cases. Briggs had the look of a man doing arithmetic in his head and not liking the answers. The volume substitutions if someone is altering the volume figures at the recording stage. Then Harrington's commission calculations are also incorrect, Nora said. "You've also been underpaid. Not by the ranchers, by the bank recording process." Briggs stared at her. She slid a single page across the table, not the full audit, but a summary she'd prepared specifically for this conversation. He read it again. "I need to contact our legal office," he said. "Of course," Nora said. "I'd be glad to provide the full documentation to your legal office. I'd only ask that if Harrington decides to conduct its own audit, the findings be made available to the Kansas Banking Commission inquiry currently underway." Briggs looked up sharply. "The commission is already involved." "The referral was submitted this morning," she said. He looked at her. He looked at Jack. He looked back at the single page in his hands. "Mrs. Aldridge," he said, "who are you exactly?" "I'm the woman who manages the Aldridge accounts," she said. He looked at Jack. "She's very good." "I know," Jack said. She didn't look at Jack when he said that. She looked at Cord Briggs and kept her face exactly as it was. But something happened in her chest that she was going to have to examine later in private. They left Harrington's office at 8:15. The street outside was beginning to fill with the ordinary business of a Caldwell morning, and the cold was the particular flat cold of a January day that isn't going to get much better. Jack said, "Ferris will hear about this by noon." "I know. Marsh too." I know. Are you worried? She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. I'm worried about what he does between now and when the commission moves. Ferris is cornered. Cornered men do things they wouldn't otherwise do. What do you think he'll do? He'll try to discredit the documentation, she said. Or discredit me. If he can make the case that the audit is the work of a desperate rancher's wife with no standing and no credibility, he buys time. Vane's certification makes that harder, but not impossible. What else? He might try to pressure other ranchers not to cooperate with the inquiry. The ones who lost their land, if they won't testify, the commission has documentation, but no witnesses. Martha Henson, Jack said, and Daniel Vane. And anyone else we can get to before Ferris does. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Maggie knows everyone, every family that's been affected. She's been tracking this for a year. I know. I need to talk to her again today. Nora paused. Jack, there's something else. He stopped walking, looked at her. When the inquiry opens and Ferris understands the full scope of it, the multiple accounts Harrington, the commission, he's going to look for the source. He's going to trace this back to whoever built the case. She met his eyes. He's going to trace it back to this ranch. Let him, Jack said. Without hesitation. I want you to understand what that means. He doesn't just have friends in this county, Jack. He has leverage. He has relationships with people who make decisions about water rights, grazing permits, county contracts. He can make life very difficult. He's already made life difficult, Jack said. He stole $900 from us over 3 years. He was 6 weeks from taking our land. His voice was level the way it got when he had decided something and was no longer spending energy on the decision. What else is he going to do that he hasn't already done? She looked at him. Let him come, Jack said. We're not stopping. She looked at him for a moment and felt that thing again, the thing she didn't have a word for yet, the thing that had been building since a bowl of stew on a cold first night, and she thought, I don't know how I came to be standing in Caldwell, Kansas on a January morning next to this man, but I am here, and the land is at our back, and we are not stopping. All right, she said. Maggie's first, he said. Then back to the ranch. They turned toward Maggie Pruitt's. They were halfway there when Hank Miller came around the corner of the post office at a pace that was 2 steps short of running, and he stopped when he saw them, and his face had the look of a man who has just seen the thing he was afraid of confirmed. Marsh went to the ranch, Hank said, an hour ago, with the same 2 men. Jack went very still. Eli's fine. He's with Mrs. Garrett next door. I sent him there when I saw them coming. But Marsh Jack, he went to the office. He was in the office for 20 minutes before I could get to town to find you. Nora's stomach dropped. The office. He was looking for something, Hank said. I don't know what he found. She thought about what was still in the office. The drafts she hadn't taken. The notes. The working papers from the first 3 days of the audit before she'd compiled the final document. Working papers that showed the methodology, that showed in their unfinished state exactly how she'd built the case. That could be used by someone who knew what they were looking for to find and close the gaps before the commission auditors arrived. We need to go back, she said. They were already moving. They rode back hard. Hank pushed his horse and Jack pushed his, and Nora held on with the satchel pressed against her side, and the cold air hitting her face, and her mind running through everything that had been left in that office, cataloging it the way she cataloged ledger entries, fast, precise, without flinching from the numbers. The working papers, the draft notes from days 1 and 2 before she'd organized the final document. The cross-reference sheet she'd made on the first morning, the one that showed exactly how she'd connected the volume substitutions to the rounding pattern. If Marsh had taken that sheet, he knew her methodology completely. He knew what evidence existed, and more dangerously, what evidence didn't exist yet. He knew where the gaps were. She knew what she would do with that information if she were Ferris. She would move on those gaps before the commission auditors arrived. Alter or destroy the bank's internal records that hadn't yet been cross-referenced. Make the methodology unprovable without the original bank documents. She thought about this the whole ride back, and by the time they reached the ranch yard, she had a plan that she didn't like, but that she thought would work. Hank went straight to the office. Nora and Jack followed him in, and she looked at the desk and knew immediately what was missing. The cross-reference sheet, gone. The draft notes from day one, gone. 2 of the early working papers, but not the Henson addendum, not the compiled final document because she'd taken that, and not the loan agreement itself, which was still in the bottom drawer where she'd found it because Marsh apparently hadn't looked that far down. She stood in the middle of the office and breathed. "What did he take?" Jack said. "The methodology notes. The early working papers." She turned around. "He knows how I built the case. He knows which records I used." "Can he use that, too?" "If Ferris moves fast enough, yes. The bank's internal recording documents, the ones that would show the alteration mechanism, if those get altered or disappeared before the commission auditors arrive, I lose part of the chain of evidence." She paused. "Not all of it. Vane's certification still stands. The Henson addendum still stands. But the mechanism evidence, how it was done by whom, that gets harder to prove." Hank said quietly from the doorway, "There's something else." They both looked at him. "While Marsh was in here," Hank said, "the other man, the quiet one, he was outside talking to Denny." Denny was the youngest of Jack's ranch hands, 19, earnest in his first year of working cattle. "Talking to him about what?" Jack said. Hank's jaw was tight. "Denny came to me after they left. He said the man offered him money, $20, to sign a statement saying that the Aldridge financial records had been mismanaged, that there were discrepancies caused by Mrs. Aldridge altering the books after the fact." The room went very quiet. Nora felt it land the specific quality of it, the thing that Ferris had understood, and she had underestimated. She could document fraud in a ledger. She could build a case that held together under professional scrutiny. But if someone planted the counter-narrative that she was the one who had altered records, that the audit was itself a fabrication by a desperate woman trying to cover embezzlement, it didn't have to be proven. It just had to create enough doubt to slow the commission down. "Did Denny take the money?" Jack said. His voice was very quiet. "No," Hank said. "He told them to get off the property." A pause. "He's a good kid." "He is," Jack said. He exhaled. "Where is he?" "Barn." Jack went to find Denny. Nora stayed in the office and stood at the desk and looked at the gaps where the papers had been, and thought about what she had and what she didn't have, and what Ferris knew and what he didn't know, and what needed to happen in the next 48 hours. Because that was the window. 2 days, maybe 3, before Ferris could move to alter his bank's internal records. The commission referral was in Topeka, but a referral wasn't an active inquiry, yet Holland had to review it, confirm it warranted investigation, assign auditors. That process took time that Ferris would use, unless she could eliminate his ability to use it. She sat down at the desk and picked up her pen and started writing. Jack came back 20 minutes later. He stood in the doorway and looked at her and said, "What are you doing?" "Writing a letter to Holland directly," she said without looking up. "Not the formal referral that's already submitted. A direct communication explaining that the evidence has been partially compromised by a third party and requesting expedited review before additional records can be altered." "Can you do that?" "Contact him directly?" "There's nothing that says I can't. He may not respond to it, but if he does, it accelerates the inquiry." "It could." She kept writing. "Maggie said he's been waiting for documentation with professional standing. He has that now. If I communicate directly that the evidence is under active threat of interference, he has reason to move faster." Jack crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. He watched her write. She was aware of him watching and kept her hand steady and kept writing. After a moment he said, "When I went to the barn, Denny said the man who approached him knew your name, knew you'd been at the books, knew you'd come from Salina." Her hand stopped. She set down the pen. She looked up at Jack. "He knew your history," Jack said. His voice was careful. "That you'd worked in your uncle's dry goods store. That your uncle's son let you go." She thought about what that meant. Someone had gathered information about her specifically. Her background, her work history, her situation before Caldwell. That kind of information didn't come from a conversation with a broker. It came from deliberate inquiry, from someone who had been paying attention since before she arrived. "He knew about me before I started the audit," she said slowly. "Seems that way." Which means, she stopped, rebuilt the sequence. When Marsh came that first day, he said he was there about a contract review, but he already knew who I was. He wasn't assessing the ranch's financial situation. He was assessing whether I was a threat. Someone told him about you. Or someone told Ferris. Before I was brought here. She looked at Jack. Who knew about the arrangement, about you bringing someone in? Hank, the lawyer who drew up the papers, the judge. He paused. The clerk at the land office in Caldwell who asked about my financial situation when I inquired about the deed amendment. The land office, she said. That clerk, does he have connections to the bank? Jack's expression shifted. His brother-in-law works at the Caldwell Merchant Bank, she breathed. They've known someone was coming. They may not have known who or whether it would matter. But when I started asking questions, and Marsh came and saw me handling the books, he reported back, and they started gathering information about me to use if they needed it. To use how? Jack said. To discredit me. If the audit moves forward and they can't stop it through the commission, they attack the person who built it. A woman with no professional credentials, no family standing, no established history in this county who came from nowhere and married a failing rancher and immediately started making allegations about the bank. She heard herself saying it and felt the cold clarity of understanding exactly what she looked like from the outside if someone chose to frame it that way. It would work, Jack. On enough people in enough rooms, it would create enough doubt. Jack looked at her. He was doing that thing again, really looking with the full weight of his attention. Then we don't give them the room to say it, he said. How? We don't wait for the commission to move on its own timeline. We make the case public, before Ferris can frame the narrative. She stared at him. The Caldwell Chronicle, the reporter that Maggie tried before. Not that reporter. Maggie said he lost interest. But there's a paper in Wichita, the Eagle. They cover banking and land issues across the whole region. If we give them the documentation, we give Ferris warning that the press is involved, she said. He'll move to suppress. He can't suppress what's already in print, Jack said. She looked at him. At this man who had been described to her as a man who barely spoke, who kept himself contained and private, and did not ask for help and did not look for it. Who had just sat across from her in his dead wife's house and told her, this place is yours. And who was now looking at her with the particular expression of someone who has decided that half measures are done. The Eagle would want to verify the documentation independently, she said. With Vane's certification they can. It would take a week for them to verify and publish, maybe more. Then we need to keep Ferris busy for a week, Jack said. We need to keep him looking in the wrong direction. She thought about it. If Harrington moves first, if Cord Briggs contacts the bank formally about the contract discrepancies before the end of business today, Ferris will be managing that conversation. He'll be preparing his response to Harrington's legal office. He'll be distracted, Jack said. Distracted, she agreed. Hank, she raised her voice. Hank appeared in the doorway within 5 seconds, which confirmed he had been approximately 4 steps away the whole time, which she decided not to comment on. Can you ride to Harrington's office and deliver a message to Cord Briggs? I can leave in 10 minutes. I'll have it written in 5. She picked up her pen. Tell him we strongly encourage him to make his formal inquiry to the bank today. Today, not this week, and tell him why. She wrote the message. Hank left. She finished the letter to Holland. Then she sat back and looked at the ceiling and thought about whether there was anything she had missed and concluded that there probably was, but she couldn't see it from where she was standing, which was the particular discomfort of a situation that was moving faster than she could fully map. There's one more thing, Jack said. She looked at him. Ferris is going to come here himself, Jack said. Not Marsh, Ferris. When he understands the scope of it, the Commission Harrington, the potential press, he's going to come here to make an offer. What kind of offer? The kind that makes the whole thing go away. For a price. We won't accept it. No. But when he comes, I want you to let me hear what he has to say before you respond. He paused. Because I want to know exactly what he thinks this is worth. What he thinks we're worth. And I want to hear him say it. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something in that, something that was not about money or evidence or commission referrals, something older and quieter and more personal than any of that. All right, she said. He nodded. He stood. He went out to the yard, and she heard him talking to one of the hands about the south fence in the ordinary voice of a man managing an ordinary day, and she thought about how extraordinary it was to be able to hold both things at once. The crisis and the fence, the war and the daily work, and how that was perhaps the most essentially Western thing she had encountered since she arrived in Kansas. You did not stop working because the situation was dire. You worked because the situation was dire, and the work itself was the argument that you were still standing. She went back to the letter to Holland and made it better. Eli came home at noon. He came through the door with the brisk efficiency of a child who has been told to go to the neighbors and doesn't feel the need to perform gratitude about having been sent there. And he dropped his coat on the hook and said to Nora, "Hank said men came to the office." "They did," she said. "Did they take things?" "Some papers, not the important ones." He thought about this. Why would they take papers? Because the papers prove something they don't want proven. He considered that with the serious digesting look that she had come to associate with Eli processing something real. "Are we going to be okay?" She looked at him. 8 years old, standing in his kitchen in his stockings, asking with the directness of a child who has learned that adults sometimes lie about being okay and has decided to ask anyway because the asking itself is something. "Yes," she said. "We are." "You sound like you mean it," he said. "Not like when Pa says it." She blinked. "What does it sound like when your Pa says it?" "Like he's trying to make it true by saying it," Eli said. "You sound like you already know it." She looked at this boy who had his father's eyes and his father's directness, and something else. A precision of observation that she thought was entirely his own, and felt something move in her chest that she was going to have to think about later. "I don't always know it," she said honestly. "But right now, in this case, I'm fairly sure. Will that do?" He thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "That'll do." He went to get something to eat, and she went back to work, and the afternoon moved, and Jack came in and went out, and Hank came back from Harrington's with confirmation that Briggs had sent a formal inquiry to the bank by messenger at 2 o'clock. And Nora wrote the contact letter for the Wichita Eagle and set it aside to give to Jack to review. And by 5 o'clock, she had done everything she could do from inside this house on this day. She went to the kitchen and started supper. It was the first time since the first night that she'd cooked a proper meal. The past week had been functional, eating whatever was fastest, because there was always something else that needed doing. Tonight she made cornbread from the meal in the pantry, and a proper beef stew with the last of the root vegetables, and she set the table with 3 places, the way she'd seen Jack do, and she was at the stove when she heard him come in. He stopped behind her. She heard the stillness of him. "You cooked," he said. "It seemed like the right night for it," she said without turning. He didn't say anything else, but she heard him sit down, and after a moment, she heard the lighter sound of a smaller chair, and then Eli's voice saying, "Is that real cornbread?" with a reverence that was, she thought, the most sincere compliment she had received all week. They ate together, and Eli talked about the neighbor's dog, about a horse he'd seen on the road, about a question he had regarding whether fish slept, which generated a genuine conversation between all 3 of them about fish biology and the nature of sleep in cold-blooded animals. And Nora found herself in the middle of an argument about whether a fish's eyes being open meant it was awake or not, and Jack said with complete seriousness, "How would you know if a fish was asleep? It can't close its eyes." And Eli said, "Maybe it goes slower." And Nora said, "That's actually probably right. Fish go into a low-activity state, And then all three of them were quiet for a moment, because they had all just noticed the same thing at the same time, that this was supper. That this was the specific, particular, irreplaceable thing of a family at a table, and it had happened so naturally that none of them had seen it start. Eli went upstairs early. He said he was tired, but he also stopped at the foot of the stairs and said to Nora, "The stew was really good." With the careful sincerity of a child who has decided that something deserves acknowledgement and has worked up to saying it, and she said, "Thank you, Eli," and he went upstairs. She and Jack were left at the table. "The Eagle letter," she said. "I want you to read it before we send it." "Tomorrow?" he said. "Ferris might move tomorrow." "Nora." His voice was not sharp, but it was definite. 1 hour. Sit here 1 hour and don't work." She looked at him. He looked back. There was something different in his face. Tonight had been something different since the morning since he'd said, "This place is yours," in the kitchen. Firelight at 2 in the morning, something that had not gone back to where it had been before. She set down her pen. She sat. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot on the stove and set one in front of her, and sat across from her, and they sat in the kitchen of the Aldridge Ranch in the January evening, and drank their coffee, and the fire was going, and upstairs, Eli was probably already asleep, and outside, the Kansas wind was doing what it did. "Tell me something," he said. "Something that isn't about Ferris." She thought about it. "I used to read to my mother," she said. "On winter evenings when the store was closed and my uncle was asleep. She liked stories, anything really, novels, newspapers, the almanac, if that was all there was. She said she liked the sound of reading more than the content." She paused. "I haven't read aloud to anyone since she died." He was quiet for a moment. "What was her name?" "Eleanor," she said. "Everyone called her Nell." He nodded. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, and she watched him do it, that unconscious movement of large hands around a small cup, and felt the domesticity of it in a way that was not painful exactly, but was a kind of ache. The specific ache of something you haven't had in a very long time, pressing against the place where it belongs. "My wife's name was Clara," he said. It was the first time he had said it to her directly. "She was from Ohio. She hated Kansas for the first 2 years, and then one morning she woke up and said she understood it, and after that she was fine." He paused. "I never knew what changed." "Maybe nothing changed," Nora said. "Maybe she just stopped fighting it." He looked at her. "Is that what you've done?" She thought about it honestly. "I haven't fought it," she said. "I don't think I've fully decided to stay inside it yet either." She looked at her coffee. "I'm still..." She searched for the word. "Arriving. I think I'm still arriving." "You've been here a week," he said. "Some arrivals take longer than the journey." He looked at her with an expression that was, she thought, one of the most open things she had seen on his face, and he said very quietly, "Take your time." She looked back at him, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt the particular stillness of 2 people who are standing at the edge of something neither of them has named yet, and neither of them is ready to name yet, but both of them can feel. Then his expression changed, sharpened. He turned his head slightly, the way men do when they've heard something that their body registered before their mind caught up. "Horse," he said. She heard it a second later. 1 horse. Coming fast. Coming up the road toward the ranch at a pace that was not casual. Jack was at the door before she'd set down her cup. He opened it. She came and stood behind him and looked out at the dark yard. The horse pulled up, and the rider was Maggie Pruitt, which was wrong in every way. Maggie Pruitt did not ride at night, not at this pace, not without warning. She came off the horse without waiting for help, and walked to the porch, and looked at both of them, and said, "Ferris is moving tonight. He's going to the county judge. He's filing for an emergency injunction to freeze all financial documents related to the Aldridge account pending an investigation of fraudulent audit practices." Nora's blood went cold. An injunction. If Ferris got an emergency injunction tonight, it would freeze the documentation before the commission could act on the referral. It would frame the entire case as a dispute. Ferris alleging fraud by Nora. Nora, alleging fraud by Ferris, and the commission would have to wait for the court process to resolve before they could move. That could take months, 6 months, a year. Long enough for every bank record that mattered to be quietly managed. "Which judge?" Jack said. "Calloway," Maggie said. Jack made a sound that was not a word. "He's Ferris's man," Nora said. "He's had dinner at Ferris's house 6 times in the past year," Maggie said. "I know because I live 2 houses from Ferris and I pay attention." "Who told you about the injunction?" "Arthur Vane. Ferris sent his lawyer to Vane's house tonight to threaten him. To tell him that if he didn't withdraw his certification, the bank would call in a personal note that Vane has outstanding from 7 years ago." Maggie's voice was flat with barely contained fury. A personal note that Vane didn't know the bank still held because it was supposed to have been discharged. Nora's mind was moving fast. Vane was the certification. Without Vane, the commission referral was documentation without professional standing. Without professional standing, Holland had reason to slow down, to treat it as an unverified complaint rather than a certified audit. "Is Vane going to withdraw?" she said. "He called me before he answered them," Maggie said. "He wanted to know where you were." She was already moving. She went inside, got her coat, got the satchel. She came back out to the porch. "Take me to Vane," she said to Maggie. "Nora," Jack said. "The injunction takes until morning to file and be signed even as an emergency motion. Calloway won't sign anything tonight without at least reviewing the paperwork. He's complicit, but he's cautious. He'll make Ferris's lawyer come back at first light." She was pulling on her coat. "That gives me until dawn to get to Vane Shore, up the certification so it cannot be withdrawn under threat, and get a counterfiling in front of a different judge before Calloway signs anything." "A different judge," Jack said. "Who?" She looked at him. "Maggie is there, a federal land office examiner in this district, a federal appointment, not state." Maggie thought for exactly 2 seconds. "There's a federal surveying court examiner based in Wichita, comes through this district quarterly. His name is Aldous Reed." "Does he have jurisdiction over banking commission referrals?" "He has federal jurisdiction over any matter that involves fraudulent representation of land-related financial instruments," Maggie said slowly, as if she was working it out as she said it. "And a cattle sale is a land-related financial instrument if the cattle are the collateral on a land loan." "Can we reach him by morning?" "I can send a telegraph from Caldwell tonight," Maggie said. "If Reed responds and agrees to review the documentation before Calloway signs the injunction, it's a federal matter. Calloway can't touch a federal case in progress." Nora looked at Jack. "That's how we stop the injunction." Jack stared at her. "You just built that from nothing in 30 seconds. "I built it from 3 things Maggie said in the past 2 minutes, she said. "It might not work, but it's what we have." He looked at her. And then he did something she was not expecting. He stepped forward, and he took her face in both hands, briefly, carefully, the way you hold something you're afraid of damaging, and he looked at her for 1 single second, with everything that had been building in those gray eyes for a week, and then he let go. "Go," he said. "I'll follow with Hank." She went, and she and Maggie rode to Vane's. Vane was at the door, pale and tight-jawed, and he looked at Nora and said, "They have a note." "I know," she said. "Let me see it." He showed her. She read it. She looked up. "This note was issued in 1875, she said. "The original loan agreement has a discharge clause at 7 years. It should have discharged in 1882. She looked at Vane. "Did you ever receive written confirmation of discharge?" I assumed. "They told you it was discharged but never sent written confirmation," she said. "Which means they've been holding it, keeping it available to use exactly like this." She set the note down. "Mr. Vane, this note is potentially fraudulent under the same mechanism as the Aldridge account alterations. If we add it to the commission referral as an additional instance, it becomes evidence of a pattern of using fraudulent debt instruments as leverage," Vane said. His voice had changed. "Not just against ranchers, against professionals, against anyone who might threaten them." "Yes," she said. He looked at the note. He looked at her. He straightened. "I'm not withdrawing the certification," he said. "Good," she said. "Now I need you to write me one more document, tonight." He sat down. She told him what she needed. He wrote it. His hands were steady. Outside, Maggie had already left for the telegraph office. Nora sat across from Arthur Vane in his kitchen at 10 o'clock at night and watched him write and thought about how a week ago she had been at a boarding house with $4 and a bag that barely closed, and now she was sitting in the middle of something that was bigger than she had understood when she started. That had tentacles. She was still discovering that was going to come to a point in the next few hours in a way she could not entirely predict. And she thought, "I am not afraid. I am not afraid because I have held worse than this in my hands, and I am still here. And the work is good, and the evidence is real, and the man who put a full bowl in front of me on the first night is riding toward me right now through the dark with Hank Miller beside him. And that is," she thought about the exact word and found it, "that is enough. For right now, that is enough." Vane finished the document. He signed it. He handed it to her. She put it in the satchel with everything else. The telegraph to Aldous Reed went at 10:30. They didn't know if he would answer. They didn't know if he would answer in time. Nora sat in Vane's kitchen with the satchel on the table in front of her and her hands around a cup of cooling coffee and waited for Jack to arrive. And while she waited, she thought about what Eli had said at the foot of the stairs. "You sound like you already know it." She didn't know it. She was about as far from knowing it as a person could be, sitting in a kitchen in January with a fraudulent banker moving against them in the dark and a federal examiner who might or might not answer a telegraph and an injunction that might or might not be signed at dawn. But she was still here. She was still here, and the satchel was full, and the documentation was real, and she had built something out of nothing that was harder to knock down than anyone had expected. She heard horses outside. 2 sets of hooves. Jack and Hank. She picked up the satchel and went to the door. Jack came through Vane's door with Hank 2 steps behind him, and he looked at Nora standing there with the satchel and read her face the way he had learned to read it over the past week, fast, completely without asking unnecessary questions. "Read," he said. "No answer yet," she said. "Maggie's waiting at the telegraph office." "How long do we have before Calloway can sign?" "First light. Maybe 6 o'clock. Maybe 6:30 if Ferris's lawyer is slow." She looked at the clock on Vane's wall. It was 10:52. 7 hours. What do we need to do in 7 hours? She had been thinking about this since she sat down with Vane's coffee. She had arranged it in order of dependency, the way she arranged ledger entries. What had to happen before, what blocked what could move in parallel. If Reed answers and agrees to review, we need to get everything to him before Calloway's office opens. That means a rider to Wichita tonight if Reed is in Wichita, or to wherever he is if he's on circuit. "I can ride to Wichita," Hank said. He said it simply the way Hank said everything, not as a sacrifice, just as a fact about what he was willing to do. "It's 6 hours each way," Jack said. "Then I'd better leave now," Hank said. Jack looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Take the bay. She's faster." Hank nodded and went. "If Reed doesn't answer," Jack said, "then we need Calloway to have a reason to hesitate before signing. A reason that has nothing to do with us." She looked at Vane. "Mr. Vane, the county commissioner you spoke to a year ago. The one who was sympathetic and did nothing. Is he still in office?" "Hargreaves. Yes." "Is he up for re-election?" Vane's eyes sharpened. "This spring. And if it became known that he had been informed of a systematic land fraud in his county a year ago and had failed to act, it would be a significant problem for his campaign," Vane said. "If Hargreaves received a formal communication tonight from multiple parties, including a certified auditor and a representative of Harrington Cattle Company, requesting him to formally notify Judge Calloway that any emergency injunction in the Aldridge matter should be delayed pending his own review." She stopped. "He might not do it, but he might. If he understands the alternative is having his inaction become public record before the election." Vane looked at her. "You want to make a county commissioner afraid of a judge?" I want to make a county commissioner afraid of a newspaper, she said. The judge is just the mechanism. Jack said from behind her, the Eagle letter, the one you wrote today. She turned. If Hargreaves understands that the Wichita Eagle has already been contacted about this case, and that his response or non-response tonight will be part of that story. He'll act, Jack said. He might act, she said. Politicians don't like being on the wrong side of a story that's already in motion. Who delivers the message to Hargreaves? Vane said. Someone he respects, Nora said. Someone he can't dismiss as a desperate rancher or an unknown woman. She looked at Vane. Vane straightened. I haven't spoken to Hargreaves in a year, he said. He didn't listen then. He didn't have 49 documented instances then, she said, and a Harrington Cattle Company inquiry, and a Kansas Banking Commission referral. She paused. And a federal examiner who may or may not be in play. He had one woman's word then. Now he has something he can see in print. Vane was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and reached for his coat. I know where Hargreaves lives, he said. So do I, Maggie said from the doorway. She had come back from the telegraph office so quietly that none of them had heard her, and she was standing there with her coat still on and her expression carrying news that she was managing carefully. Reed answered, she said. The room went still. He's in Hutchinson, Maggie said. On circuit. He got the telegraph 20 minutes ago. She held out a folded paper. His response. Nora took it and read it. She read it twice. Then she looked up. He'll review the documentation, she said. He's asking for the full package by 7 this morning. He says if the documentation supports federal jurisdiction fraudulent representation of land collateralized financial instruments, he will issue a federal hold on all related county court proceedings pending his review. Jack said, a federal hold. Callaway can't sign an injunction against a federal proceeding in progress, Nora said. If Reed issues the hold before 6 o'clock, Ferris loses his window, Jack said. Yes. She looked at the telegraph. Hutchinson is 3 hours by fast rider. Hank is going to Wichita. She looked at Jack. He was already thinking it. I'll go to Hutchinson. Jack. Who else? He said. Not sharp, just true. She looked at him. He looked back. And she understood that this was not a question about who could ride to Hutchinson. It was a question about who was going to stand at the center of this thing. And the answer was the same as it had been since the first night at the desk when she'd said, I can build a case. And he'd said, how long do you need? Both of them. Both of them standing at the center. That was the answer. The full documentation is in the satchel, she said. Everything, the audit, the Henson addendum, Vane's certification, the Vane note addendum, the Harrington summary, all of it. She handed him the satchel. Don't let it out of your hands. He took it. He looked at her. In the lamplight of Arthur Vane's kitchen with Maggie Pruitt watching and Vane reaching for his coat and 3 hours of cold riding ahead of him. Jack Aldridge looked at Nora with the gray eyes that had been giving her less and less distance every day for a week, and said, When I get back. When you get back, she said. He went. The door closed and the room was quieter without him, and she felt his absence in the specific physical way that you feel the absence of something that has been close to you for long enough to leave a shape in the air. When he gets back, what? Maggie said with the frankness of a woman who had earned the right to ask direct questions. I don't know exactly, Nora said, but something. Maggie looked at her with the expression of someone who does know exactly and is giving the other person the grace of finding out in their own time. All right, she said. Let's go see Hargreaves. Hargreaves lived in a well-kept house on the east edge of Caldwell that communicated its occupants' civic importance without being ostentatious about it. The lights were still on when they arrived, which Maggie said meant he was either still working or had heard something was moving and was waiting, and either way, it was useful. Vane knocked. Hargreaves opened the door in his shirt sleeves with the expression of a man who has been expecting something unpleasant and is deciding how to manage it. He saw Vane, then Maggie, then Nora. Arthur. he said. You need to hear this, Vane said. Tonight. Now. And then you need to decide what kind of man you are before 6 o'clock in the morning. Hargreaves stepped back and let them in. They sat in his front room. Nora had made a copy of the key documents before Jack wrote a summary page Vane's certification and the single-page Harrington summary. She laid them on his table. Vane spoke first. He spoke for 7 minutes without stopping. He talked about the certification about Daniel, about Arthur's own son's ranch, lost to the same mechanism, about the 49 instances and the 7 families, and the 5 years of systematic fraud running through this county, while Hargreaves held an office that was supposed to protect against exactly this. Hargreaves's face changed while Vane talked. Not dramatically, he was a careful politician, and careful politicians don't let their faces move too much in front of witnesses. But something shifted underneath it. The particular shift of a man who has been comfortable with his own inaction and is suddenly being made to look at it directly. When Vane finished, Hargreaves said, "You've submitted to the commission." "The referral is already in Holland's hands," Nora said, "and to the federal examiner. Jack Aldridge is writing to Hutchinson tonight. Reed will have the full documentation before 7. Hargreaves looked at the papers. "And the Eagle?" "Has been contacted," she said. "The story is in motion regardless of what you do tonight. What you do tonight determines whether you're in it as someone who acted or someone who didn't." Hargreaves was very still. He was a man who had been comfortable, she thought, with the particular convenience of not quite knowing the full extent of something, of being sympathetic without being activated. Vane had given him that option a year ago, and he had chosen it. He didn't have it now. It was sitting on his table in 49 documented instances with a certified signature and a federal examiner's telegraph response, and the weight of 7 families' losses. "What do you need from me?" he said. "A formal written communication to Judge Calloway," Nora said. "Tonight, requesting he hold any emergency injunction in the Aldridge matter until he has reviewed the commission referral documentation and confirmed it does not fall under federal jurisdiction." She paused. "It doesn't commit you to a position. It only asks a judge to do his due diligence. And if Calloway ignores it, then he ignores a written request from the county commissioner," she said, "and that becomes part of the record." Hargreaves looked at the documents. He looked at Vane. He looked at Maggie, who looked back at him with 60 years of Kansas in her face, and no patience left for comfort. He picked up his pen. He wrote for 4 minutes. He signed it. He sealed it. "I'll send it by messenger tonight," he said. "Calloway will have it before midnight." Nora took the sealed envelope and looked at it. "Thank you, Commissioner," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. He sounded tired. "I should have done something a year ago. I knew something was wrong, and I told myself I didn't have enough to act on." He looked at Vane. "I'm sorry about Daniel." Vane looked at him for a long moment. "Help us finish it," he said. "That's apology enough." They left Hargreaves's house at 11:40. The night was fully dark and fully cold, and the streets of Caldwell were empty except for the lights in the saloons and the movement of a cat across a doorway. Maggie sent the message to Calloway by the night messenger, who worked out of the post office, a boy named Curtis, who ran messages all night for a dime apiece and who set out immediately. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Nora went back to the ranch. Eli was asleep. The fire was banked. She did not sleep. She sat in the kitchen and worked through every possible countermove Ferris had available to him, looking for the one she'd missed, finding 2 that worried her and none that she couldn't answer. And by 3 in the morning, she had filled another page with notes and drunk 4 cups of coffee and begun to feel the specific electric quality of a night that has gone on long enough that your body gives up pretending it is tired and simply stays awake. At 4:15, Maggie came to the kitchen door. "Calloway sent a response," she said. "He's holding the injunction pending review. He cited the commissioner's request and the federal examiner inquiry." Nora set down her cup. "He's holding it," she said. until Reed's review is complete, which means Ferris can't move until Reed finishes. And Reed will finish with 49 documented instances, a certified audit, and a note instrument that was fraudulently withheld. She looked at Maggie. It's enough. It's going to be enough. Maggie sat down across from her. The two of them sat in Jack's kitchen in the dark hours of a January morning and looked at each other. You've been here 9 days, Maggie said. Yes, 9 days, Maggie said again, as if the number itself required examination. Clara Aldridge was here 8 years before she understood this county. I'm not Clara, Nora said quietly, and I'm not trying to be. No, Maggie said. You're not. She looked at her with something that was warm in a way Maggie Pruitt probably didn't often let herself be. You're something this county hasn't had before, and I mean that as high a compliment as I know how to give. Nora looked at her coffee. I just looked at the numbers. You looked at the numbers and saw the people behind them, Maggie said. That's not the same thing at all. At 6:47 in the morning, Hank Miller rode back into the yard from Wichita. He came through the kitchen door with the look of a man who has ridden 12 hours in 14 and is running entirely on the fact that the news is good enough to justify it. Harrington's legal office received the summary last night, he said. Their attorney is filing a formal complaint with the Banking Commission this morning, independent of our referral. 2 separate complaints from 2 different parties. Nora closed her eyes for just a moment. 2 independent complaints. The commission had to open a full inquiry now, not consider it, not review it at Holland's discretion. Had to. Good, she said. Hank, go sleep. Is Jack? Not back yet. Go sleep. He went. At 8:23, Jack rode into the yard. She heard the horse and was at the door before he dismounted, which she registered as information about herself that she would think about later. He came up to the porch with the satchel over his shoulder and his face carrying the look of someone who had ridden through the night and arrived at something definitive. Reed reviewed it, he said. On the spot. He was up at 5 and he read the full documentation and the vein certification and the Harrington summary, and he issued the federal hold at 6:40. 6:40. 14 minutes before Calloway's office opened. It's federal, she said. It's federal, he said. Ferris can't touch it through county court. The commission inquiry is protected. The Harrington complaint goes through the federal process alongside ours. He stopped, looked at her. Reed also said he said the mechanism you identified, the rounding analysis. He said in 20 years of examining financial records he'd seen that specific alteration method used twice before. Both times it traced back to a single source inside the bank. One person inside the bank doing the alterations, she said. The same one across all accounts. Reed thinks so. He's requesting the bank's internal personnel records as part of the federal review. Jack paused. If he finds who it is, then it's not just fraud, it's conspiracy. Ferris the inside man, Marsh as the broker, the whole structure comes apart. Jack looked at her. It's over, he said. Not finished, but over. The direction of it has changed. She stood on the porch in the January morning, 9 days after arriving with $4 and a bag that barely closed, and felt the thing she'd been holding so carefully in herself. The controlled, managed, functional thing that had kept her moving through ledgers and night rides, and Marsh's cold eyes, and Ferris's machinery felt at ease. Just slightly, just enough. We still have to go to the bank, she said. I know. Ferris is going to be there. He knows the hold went through. He knows what it means. I know that too, Jack said. We're still going. She looked at him. Today? Give me an hour, he said. Let me see Eli. She let him see Eli. She went to the office and she sat at the desk for the last time and went through the final piece. The outstanding loan balance recalculated with the $912 in documented discrepancies, removed from the principal. Recalculated with the corrected interest rate from the original agreement, instead of the altered rate Ferris had been applying, recalculated with the Cray arrangement in place. The number she arrived at was different from anything the bank had on record. It was a number she could pay. Not easily. Not without selling 2 head and drawing on every dollar of cash reserve the ranch had. But the silver dollars that Maggie had once mentioned Jack's father's coins in the wall of the old storeroom, which Hank had confirmed existed when she'd asked quietly 3 days ago, those added to the receivables from outstanding cattle debts she'd identified, brought the number into reach. She wrote it down. She put it in the satchel. She went and found Jack. He was in the barn with Eli. She stood at the door for a moment before they saw her. Jack was showing Eli something about the way a horse favored its left side when standing, and Eli was listening with his full serious attention. And for a moment, she just watched them, this father and this son, who had been drowning together quietly for 2 years, and who were both, she thought, beginning to breathe again. Eli saw her first. "You going to town?" he said. "Yes," she said. "To the bank?" "Yes." He thought about it. "Are you going to make them give the money back?" "That's the plan," she said. He nodded. The nod of a child who has decided that some plans are sound. Then he said, without looking up from the horse's leg, "Can I come?" Jack and Nora looked at each other over Eli's head. "Yes," Jack said. "Go get your coat." Eli went. They rode into Caldwell together, the 3 of them in the cold January morning, with the flat Kansas sky above them and the hard Kansas ground under the horses' feet. And Nora sat straight in the saddle with the satchel across her knees and thought about nothing in particular and everything at once, and felt the specific, irreplaceable quality of a moment that is not yet finished but is clearly going to matter. William Ferris was at the bank when they arrived. She had expected that a man like Ferris doesn't retreat when cornered. He comes forward with more force. He was standing behind the counter with Gerald Peel, the lawyer, and a third man she hadn't seen before, and he looked at the 3 of them walking through the door, Jack and Nora and Eli in his winter coat, with his serious face, which she thought Ferris had probably not anticipated, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that was not performed. He was afraid, not visibly, not in any way that a casual observer would name. But she had spent 9 days looking at records constructed to conceal the truth, and she had learned to see the truth underneath, and what she saw underneath. William Ferris's composed, authoritative face was a man who had built something he thought was untouchable and was now watching it come apart and could not stop it. She said nothing to him. She went to the teller's counter and asked for the branch manager, who was not Ferris, but a younger man named Corbin, who handled day-to-day operations, and who came out from the back room with the expression of someone who has been dreading this particular morning for several hours. "I'd like to make a payment on the Aldridge account," she said. Corbin looked at Ferris. Ferris said nothing. "Of course, Mrs. Aldridge," Corbin said carefully. She opened the satchel. She put the recalculated balance statement on the counter. She put the cash, the receivables converted to cash, through a conversation with the Harrington representative who had been that morning extremely motivated to be helpful on the counter. She put the 6 silver dollars that Hank had found in the storeroom wall on the counter. They made a small, firm sound when she set them down. Silver on wood. 6 coins. "This is the full outstanding balance on the Aldridge account," she said, recalculated to correct for documented discrepancies in the transaction records, and with the applicable interest rate as stated in the original loan agreement, rather than the altered rate applied since 1880. The recalculation methodology is certified by Arthur Vane, former county assessor. Documentation of the discrepancies has been submitted to the Kansas Banking Commission and is currently under federal review by Examiner Aldous Reed. She paused. "I'd like a receipt." Corbin looked at the money. He looked at the statement. He looked at Ferris. Ferris said, "The balance on the account is..." "The balance on the account as altered is a different figure from the balance on the account as it should have been maintained," Nora said. Her voice was completely level. "The Commission inquiry and the federal review will determine which figure is correct. In the meantime, I am tendering payment of the legitimate outstanding balance as I have calculated it, with full documentation of the methodology. If the bank refuses to accept it, that refusal will be noted in the commission record, as an additional instance of bad faith dealing. Ferris looked at her. She looked back. She had been looking at this man's work for 9 days, at the shape of his greed in the gaps between numbers, at the mechanism of what he'd done, spread across 49 instances, and 7 families, and 1 old man's son, and 3 years of careful patient theft. She looked at him now, and felt no particular anger, which surprised her. What she felt was something quieter and more certain. The feeling of a person who has done the work and is standing in it. "Accept the payment, Mr. Ferris," she said. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. 5, 7. Then he turned and walked to the back office and closed the door. Peel the lawyer looked at the closed door, then at Nora, then at the money on the counter. He made the calculation that lawyers make when the institutional protection they work for has started to crack the calculation about which side of this it is better to be seen on. "Accept the payment," he said to Corbin. Corbin accepted it. He counted it twice with careful hands. He wrote the receipt. He stamped it. He handed it across the counter. Nora took it. She turned around. Jack was behind her, and Eli was beside Jack with his arms crossed and his serious face showing something that was, she thought, the beginning of relief working its way out from under 8 years of careful self-management. He looked at the receipt in her hand. "Is it done?" he said. "It's done," she said. "The whole thing. The payment is done," she said, because she believed in telling him the truth. "The inquiry will take longer. Ferris will fight it. It won't be clean or fast." She looked at him. "But we paid the debt. They can't take the ranch. That part is finished." Eli absorbed this. Then he said, "Good," with the thoroughness of a child filing something definitively away, and turned toward the door. Jack looked at Nora. He looked at the receipt in her hand. He looked at her face. He put his hand out. She looked at it. She put her hand in his. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. They walked out of the Caldwell Merchant Bank together into the cold January sunlight, their son 3 steps ahead of them, already talking about whether they could stop for something to eat before the ride home. And the receipt was in her other hand, and the satchel was over her shoulder, and the ranch was theirs. Weeks later, when the commission inquiry was well underway, and Reed's Federal Review had identified the bank clerk who'd been making the alterations under Ferris's direction, and Harrington's independent complaint had added enough institutional weight that even the county's political machinery couldn't dampen it, Maggie Pruitt asked Nora what the moment had felt like. Standing at the bank counter, laying down the silver dollars. Nora thought about it for a real moment, the way she thought about things she wanted to answer honestly. "Like math," she said. "Like when a column finally balances. You've been working at it for days and the numbers keep coming out wrong, and then you find the error and correct it, and everything resolves." She paused. It felt like the number finally came out right. Maggie looked at her. "And the rest of it? The ranch, Eli, Jack." Nora was quiet for a moment. "That doesn't feel like math," she said. "That feels like something I don't have the right word for yet." "You'll find it," Maggie said. "You find everything eventually." She did find it, though not in words. She found it on an evening in late February, when the worst of the winter had broken, and Eli was at the table with his drawings, and Jack was mending a harness by the fire, and she was at the desk in the office that was no longer a battlefield, but simply the room where she worked, and she looked up and heard the sound of the house around her, the creak of wood, the pop of the fire. Eli humming something tuneless, Jack's steady hands, and understood that this was not surviving anymore. This was something entirely different. Jack looked up from the harness. He looked at her across the room, the way he had learned to look at her fully, without guarding the distance, and said, "You're thinking loud again." "Occupational habit," she said. He almost smiled. The corner of his mouth and his eyes, and the particular ease of a man who has come back to something he thought he'd lost. "Come sit by the fire," he said. She came and sat by the fire. Eli didn't look up from his drawing. He just moved his papers slightly to the left to make room for her at the table, the automatic, unthinking gesture of a child who has stopped calculating whether someone belongs and simply made space. That was the moment. That small, wordless, perfect thing. And Nora Blake, who had arrived with $4 and a bag that barely closed, and a life already collapsing behind her, who had asked for leftovers and been given a full plate instead, who had built a case out of numbers and a home out of nothing, and fought a war with a pen and a satchel and a mind that didn't know how to stop. Sat down at the table in the firelight and felt for the first time in a very long time the quiet, irreversible weight of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She had not come to be saved. She had come to rebuild everything around her, and she had.